What would you do if the people you loved most spoke freely around you because they believed you could never hear another word? How would you live if, after years of silence, you suddenly heard every secret comment your wife, her friends, and her family made while you pretended to still be deaf? This is how getting my hearing back quietly showed me the truth about my own house and how I used that truth, calmly and legally, to change everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Ivan, and for a long time I lived in a world without sound. 10 years is a strange amount of time to be deaf. It is long enough that people start to treat your silence as permanent, like it is part of the furniture. It is also long enough for them to build new habits around you, new ways of speaking, new ways of thinking, because they believe your ears will never wake up again. Before the accident, I was a factory technician. I worked with machines that were loud and stubborn, metal arms that moved too fast, belts that never stopped. I liked my job. I understood the language of motors and gears even when I did not understand people. One day, a pressure valve failed. There was a bang, like the sky exploding right next to my head. When I woke up in the hospital, everything was strangely quiet. Nurses moved their lips without sound. My wife, Lena, cried, but I only saw her face twist and her shoulders shake. The doctor wrote on a piece of paper that most of my hearing was gone. He said some words about damage, nerves, and "we will see." But after some time, "we will see" became "this is your life now." In the early years, I tried to act strong. I learned to read lips as best I could. I watched faces, hands, shoulders. I paid attention to context and guessed the rest. Lena helped at first. She sat with me during appointments, turned her chair so I could see her mouth clearly, repeated what doctors and officials said. Our daughter Mira was 16 then. She translated for me with her teachers, proud and serious. People told me I was lucky to have such a caring family. I believed that. I repeated it to myself many times when nights felt long. Over time, things changed in small ways that were easy to ignore at first. When people spoke too fast or turned away, Lena sometimes did not bother to repeat. She waved her hand and said it was nothing important. When we met with someone from the pension office, I saw the man's face grow tense and his hands move as he explained something detailed. Lena turned to me and said simply that everything was fine and I did not need to worry. I wanted to trust her, and mostly I did. Still, a small part of me wondered what had been left out. At home, the television was always on. The sound did not matter to me, but the moving mouths did. I watched newsreaders and actors, trying to train my eyes. Lena and Mira sometimes forgot to turn on the subtitles. When I asked, Lena sighed and said she would do it later. Mira pressed the button quickly, then went back to her phone. Our small apartment filled with sounds I could not hear, only sense, doors closing, chairs moving, plates touching each other, music leaking from headphones. I lived inside a quiet shell, watching other people move through water. I will not lie and say Lena was cruel all the time. She did many practical things for me. She handled long phone calls. She argued with officials who spoke too fast. She explained basic things to neighbors who did not know how to talk to someone who could not hear. But slowly, I stopped being her husband and started being her project. Her responsibility, a story she told other people to prove how strong she was. I could feel the difference, even if I could not hear it. Mira grew up and moved out. She married a man named Oleg, who had a loud laugh and too much confidence for his age. He shouted at me as if shouting helped, then joked to Mira that Dad is like an old radio that only shows pictures. I saw his lips when he said it. He thought he was funny. Mira hid a smile behind her hand and then looked guilty. I pretended I had not understood. It was easier that way. Years passed. My world shrank. I stopped going out with friends from the factory because following group conversations was too hard. Many of them stopped calling anyway. People do not like to repeat themselves. My work changed to small repair jobs where communication was simple and mostly written. After some time, even that slowed. My knees hurt, my back hurt, and I told myself I had earned some rest. I received a disability pension and a small retirement payment. We had already paid off most of the apartment. On paper, we were safe. Then, one day, my general doctor suggested I see a specialist again. Medical technology had moved forward, he said. There were new implants, new devices, new tests. At first, I refused. I had built a routine around my silence. Touching it felt dangerous. But he insisted. He wrote in big letters on a pad that sometimes hope arrives late, but still arrives. That sentence stayed in my mind. Some weeks later, I sat in an ENT clinic, facing a new doctor, Dr. Kaval. He was younger than me, but older than the usual fresh faces. He spoke clearly, turned his whole body toward me, and wrote things down when needed. He examined my ears, studied old scans, ordered new tests. After a while, he said that, in my case, there was a chance. Not a promise, but a chance. With surgery and a device, I might regain part of my hearing. He explained there would be a long adaptation period. My brain would need to learn sound again. It would be confusing at first. I walked home from that appointment feeling both heavy and light. A part of me was afraid to hope. Another part, the one that remembered the feel of rain on a metal roof and the sound of my daughter laughing as a child, wanted to try. That night, I wrote everything down in a notebook, using slow letters so I would not forget. When I showed the paper to Lena, she read it quickly, then nodded. Her mouth said that if it worked, it would be easier for everyone. I think she meant easier for her. I did not blame her for thinking that. The surgery came and went, like a strange dream. I remember the sharp smell of the hospital, the bright lights, the feeling of waking up with a bandage on my head, and a deep, dull ache behind my ear. At first, nothing changed. Silence was still there, thick and familiar. Then, after some weeks of healing, I returned to the clinic to have the device activated. I sat in a small room with white walls and a computer. Dr. Koval connected the external part of the device and typed something. He told me to watch his mouth. He counted with his fingers and then pressed a key. At first, there was only a distant hiss, like wind very far away. Then I heard a small click, then the rustle of paper, then, very faintly, his voice. It did not sound like normal speech, more like a mechanical echo, but it was sound. I felt tears on my face and did not care. Over the next weeks, I went back many times for adjustments. Some days the world sounded too sharp and metallic. Other days everything was muddy, but slowly patterns formed. Footsteps became different from closing doors. A kettle whistle became different from a phone vibration. I learned again. My brain worked hard. At home, I pretended nothing had changed. I kept watching lips, moving slowly, asking Lena to write down important things. I did not tell Lena or Mira about the success right away. At first, I thought I would wait for a perfect moment, some family dinner where I would suddenly answer a question in real time and everyone would laugh and cry. I imagined Mira hugging me with joy, Lena looking relieved. I imagined this many times. But as my hearing sharpened, I began to catch small pieces of their private conversations when they believed I was still locked in silence. Those pieces did not match my sweet fantasy. One evening, I lay on the bed with the light off and my eyes closed. The apartment was quiet in the way houses never really are. From the kitchen, I heard the soft echo of dishes. The device made every clink sound close. I could hear Lena's footsteps and the vibration of her voice through the wall. At first, I could not catch words, only rhythm. Then, as my brain focused, the sounds stretched into sentences. Her phone vibrated on the table. I heard the swipe as she answered. She spoke to someone, and I caught the name Irina. I realized she was talking to her older sister. I lay there, very still, breathing slowly, pretending to sleep. Through the thin wall, Lena's voice reached me, clearer than it had in years. She said she was tired, that living with me was like living with a big quiet piece of furniture. She said I was useful because the pension and disability payments kept coming and I could still fix small things around the house, but that, in her words, I was basically gone now. She told Irina that at least I did not argue because I never heard anything and that it made planning the future easier. I stared up at the dark ceiling, every muscle in my body frozen. For the first time in 10 years, I not only saw words, I heard them too. And the first complete sentence that truly reached me from my own kitchen was my wife explaining how convenient my silence had become. I stayed very still on the bed, listening to my own wife talk about me like I was a table or a chair. She told Irina that I was not difficult anymore because I did not argue, that I did not complain the way other husbands did, that she could make decisions without having to fight. She added that if I ever became more confused with age, it would only make things simpler because people would believe her version of events. Irina's voice came through the small phone speaker, thin but clear enough. She said that Lena was smart, that many women would love to have a husband who brought money and stayed quiet. They laughed together, and every small laugh felt like a nail being carefully hammered into wood. As I lay there, I understood that this was not a sudden change. This was the end point of a long, slow slide that had started years earlier. To explain how much it hurt, I have to go back. Before the accident, I was not a perfect husband, but I was present. I brought home money, I cooked sometimes, I fixed things before they broke. When Mira was small, I read bedtime stories in funny voices and took her to the park on Saturdays. Lena liked to tell people that I was boring but reliable. She said it with a smile that sounded kind back then. After I lost my hearing, that phrase changed. It became a label, like a sticker on a box, boring, reliable, safely silent. In the first months after the hospital, everyone was kind. Friends visited with small gifts. Neighbors brought soup. people put hands on my shoulder when they spoke. I saw their mouths form words like poor man, bad luck, tragedy. Lena was at the center of all this kindness. She translated, repeated, comforted. She told people that we would manage, that I was strong. She held my hand in public. At home, however, she grew tired faster. Repeating things took energy, and life still demanded bills, papers, phone calls. When someone spoke quickly, she sometimes chose to summarize instead of translate. A long explanation from a bank worker became one short line from her. A question to me became a yes from her. I did not always notice at first. Over time, I saw patterns. When conversations were about me doing more, she translated fully. When conversations were about her getting more control, she simplified them into phrases that supported her side. For example, when the disability pension was first approved, I watched the official speak for several minutes, showing different options. Lena turned to me and said only that the smaller, simpler option was better because we could not trust the system. Later, when I learned to read more documents on my own, I saw that she had chosen the payment plan that sent the money directly to our joint account under her management. She explained that it was just easier that way, and maybe she believed that at the time, but something inside me knew a line had shifted. Mira's place in all this changed too. At 16, she had been proud to help her deaf father. At 20, she had her own life. She spoke fast, moved fast, lived on her phone. Repeating things for me slowed her down. At family birthdays, I saw her roll her eyes when I asked her to say something again. When Oleg entered the picture, it became worse. He did not grow up with a deaf person, and he seemed to think that raising his voice and making jokes counted as support. He said to Mira once that living with me must feel like having a permanent child, an extra task. He said this in another room, thinking I was not watching his lips. Mira laughed weakly and said that she loved me, but it was hard. It is funny how often people say it is hard to love you while doing very little to show that love. As my world got smaller, Lena's version of our story grew larger. With friends and family, she became the woman who had to do everything. I saw it many times. At a cousin's wedding, someone asked why I was not talking much. Lena answered before I could even open my mouth. She said I got confused with too many voices, that it was better if she handled things. She made me sound like a dull knife. People looked at her with respect and at me with soft, distant pity. Lena enjoyed that respect. I could see it in the way she drew herself up, the way she spoke with a tired but heroic tone. As the years went by, she and her sister built a shared story about me. In this story, I was always heavier, slower, less capable than before. They discussed me as if I were not there, even when I was sitting at the same table. They called me our quiet giant, our big problem, our frozen project. I learned to smile politely when they looked at me. Inside, I counted how many times they said my name like it was a chore. When they thought I could not hear, their language became sharper. They described me as a wallet that did not complain, as a dog that did not bark. Back in the present, with my new hearing, those old patterns finally gained sound. On that first night, Lena and Irina did not stop at calling me useful furniture. Irina asked practical questions. She wanted to know how much longer my pension would last at the current level, what our mortgage status was, whether I had any private savings. Lena answered as if she were explaining a recipe. She said that the apartment was almost fully paid, that my pension and disability payments arrived like clockwork, that I had some savings, but she was not sure exactly how much. Because in her words, I got confused with numbers now. That part stung. I had always been careful with numbers, even if I moved slower. They spoke about the future like project managers. Irina suggested that Lena should slowly move more things into her name. She said that men get strange with age, sometimes marrying younger women, sometimes giving things away. Lena laughed and said that in my case, she was more worried about me forgetting where I put my own keys, not about me finding a new wife. Still, she agreed that her name should be on everything important. She said that if, one day, I needed care, papers would be easier to handle if she already had control. When she said control, my ears felt hot. Irina asked how I was mentally. Lena answered that I was stable but slower, that I sometimes missed obvious things, that I repeated questions, that I did not always understand paperwork. Some of this was half true. I did move slowly. I did sometimes ask more than once because lips moved too fast. But hearing the list arranged like a medical report, delivered without warmth, made me realize how she might present me to doctors, banks, and officials in the future. I could almost see the picture: a tired wife, a confused deaf husband, a sympathetic system ready to help her manage me. The next days, I tried to act as if nothing had changed. I did not tell anyone that I could hear. I still turned my head to watch lips. I still used gestures. But inside, my mind replayed that kitchen conversation again and again. I remembered other moments from the years before and saw them in a new light. The time Lena forgot, to tell me about a neighbor's complaint, the time she signed a form for me because the office was closing soon, the way she told Mira that I would not understand the details of her move with Oleg, so there was no point in involving me. All these things formed a pattern that I had never fully seen before. One afternoon, Mira and Oleg invited us for dinner at their apartment. I decided not to adjust my hearing device too high so that sudden noises would not overwhelm me, but enough to catch voices. They sat me on the couch with the TV on mute and gave me a magazine, like a child handed a picture book. In the kitchen, they spoke freely. I heard Oleg say that it was amazing how easy it was to talk about me right in front of me. He said that at least they did not have to worry about me overhearing any plans about moving or selling things. Mira shushed him half-heartedly, but then said that she was more worried about her own future than about my feelings. When Lena joined them in the kitchen, the talk turned to money. They discussed the cost of living, rents, mortgages. Oleg said that if only they had an apartment like ours as a starting point, they would feel more free to take risks. He suggested that maybe, in a few years, Lena and I could move somewhere smaller and closer to some clinic, and then they could rent out or sell the current place. Lena did not reject the idea outright. She said that it would be complicated, but that they would see, and that everything depended on my condition. When she said condition, it sounded like she was talking about an old machine, not a man. On the way home that night, the city lights blurred as we walked. Cars passed, people laughed outside cafes. I moved beside Lena like a shadow. She held my elbow out of habit. From the side, we probably looked like a devoted couple, an aging husband and his supportive wife. Inside, however, I felt something tearing. At a crossing, when the light was red, she took out her phone and called Irina. Standing right next to me, in the quiet between cars, she told her sister that dinner had gone well, that Mira and Oleg were on board, and that now she only needed to secure the apartment and money before my mind started to match my ears and other people's eyes. When I heard Lena speak like that, so calm and practical about my life, I felt something inside me go very still. It did not explode. It did not break the way glass breaks. It just became very, very still, like water that has frozen overnight. She stood close to me at the crossing, our elbows touching, and had no idea that every word she said to her sister slid straight into my ears. When the light turned green, she put her phone away and took my arm again. She smiled at me, the same tired smile people give children or patients. She pointed to the green man on the traffic light, as if I could not see either. At home, she moved around the kitchen with quick, practiced motions, putting leftovers in containers and dropping her shoes in the hallway. She told me, with big gestures and simple words, that dinner at Mira's had been nice, that everyone said hello. I nodded. There was a time when I would have asked for every detail, pushed for more information, tried to feel included. That night, I did not ask. I just watched her mouth and remembered the words she had said at the crossing about securing the apartment and money. In the days that followed, I became two men. On the outside, I was the same slow, quiet husband who needed people to repeat things and move their lips clearly. I continued to tilt my head toward faces, pretend to misunderstand, and nod when they simplified current news for me. On the inside, I was suddenly awake in a new way. Every sound became a clue. Every casual laugh in the kitchen, every half-whispered phone call, every clink of a glass made me listen harder. I noticed that people around me had forgotten how to guard their words. For 10 years, they had lived with the idea that I could not hear. They had built habits on top of that idea. Lena talked on speakerphone more often than not. Mira came over and spoke with her while scrolling on her phone, saying whatever came to her mind because, in her view, it was only noise to me. Even Oleg, who always tried to show how clever he was, sometimes said very direct things just a few meters away, trusting my silence. One afternoon, Mira and Lena sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out between them. Mira was talking about loans, costs, and future plans. I sat in the living room with a book open on my lap, pretending to follow the print line by line. Through the thin wall and open doorway, I heard Mira say she could not imagine starting a family while still tied to an old flat and a deaf father. She said that once things were sorted with my situation, life would feel lighter. Lena told her not to feel guilty because I had had my life already. She said that now it was my turn to give them freedom. The words turned in my head like slow gears. I thought of all the extra shifts I had taken at the factory when Mira was a child, all the weekends I had skipped rest to fix other people's wiring so we could pay for her school trips. I thought of my hands, still marked with small scars from that work. And now, to my own daughter, I had become a weight she needed to drop before she could breathe. The pain was sharp, but after it passed, something else remained. A thin, cold line of clarity. That night I could not sleep. I lay awake, listening to the apartment breathe. Lena's soft snores came from beside me. The fridge hummed now and then. The pipes clicked once in a while. I looked at the ceiling and thought about stories. For years, Lena had been telling a story about me to other people. In that story, I was weak, confused, dependent, and grateful. Most people had no reason to doubt her because they never heard my side. Now, by accident, I had discovered another story, hidden under hers. One where I still understood everything, where I still had rights and choices, but where they were slowly planning to treat me as if I did not. The thought came slowly at first, then settled firmly. If I wanted anyone to believe my side of the story later, I needed more than hurt feelings. I needed proof. In my old job at the factory, when we had to fix a complicated fault, we did not just shout at the machine. We checked wires, wrote numbers, measured currents, kept records. We treated facts like tools. Here, too, I would need facts, not only for others, but for myself, so that in the future, nobody could tell me I had imagined their words. The next day, I went to the balcony where my neighbor and old coworker, Andrew, liked to sit. He was leaning on the railing with a cup of tea, looking at the dull gray yard. I greeted him the way I always did, with a nod and a small wave. For a few minutes, we talked the usual way, with me reading his lips and answering slowly. Then I decided to try something. I asked him, in a normal voice and normal speed, what he had said 1 minute earlier about the broken lift. His eyes widened. He said it again, testing me, and I repeated his words back to him, including a small joke about the lift being older than us. He stared at me for a long moment, then put his cup down. I told him quietly that I had had surgery, that my hearing was coming back step by step, and that nobody in my family knew yet. He asked why I had not told them. I said I was not ready. I said I wanted to see how they behaved when they thought I was still deaf. He shook his head slowly and said that sounded painful. I answered that it had already been painful for years, only now I could finally measure it. I did not tell Andrew everything that day. I only told him enough so that he would understand if he saw me react to things differently. Still, he gave me an important piece of advice. He said that in money and property matters, memories were weak, but records were strong. He suggested that if I heard something important, I should write it down with dates and details, not to show anyone right away, but to keep for myself. As he spoke, I felt like I was back at the factory, being reminded to log every test result. So I began a new habit. In the evenings, after everyone went to bed, I sat at the small desk in our bedroom with a notebook. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote down exact sentences, as close as my memory allowed, of what I had heard that day. I wrote where people were sitting, who else was there, what they were talking about before and after. I did not add emotion, only facts. It felt like building a map. At first, it was only words. Then I remembered something else. My old phone, the one I had stopped using when it became too hard to hear, still had a working camera. I charged it and tested the microphone. The sound was not perfect, but it picked up voices clearly if the room was quiet enough. One evening, when Lena and Irina sat in the living room, drinking tea and speaking loudly about my future, I set the phone on a shelf behind some books, aimed toward the sofa. I told them I was going to lie down. Then I left the room, pressed record from the hallway, and waited in the bedroom. My heart pounded as I watched the small red dot blink on the screen. I could hear their voices through the wall and see the sound line move up and down as they spoke. Irina asked again about the apartment papers. She said that one of her friends had helped her get power of attorney over an older relative who could not manage things anymore. She explained that once that was done, decisions became easy. Lena answered that she did not think I was that far gone yet, but that it might be useful later. She said that if doctors heard enough stories about my confusion, they would likely write what was needed. Those words made my stomach turn, but they also made something else happen. They confirmed that this was not just cruel talk. It was planning. She was thinking about how to shape my image to professionals so that any paper placed in front of them would match the story she told. That meant my story had to be stronger, clearer, backed by something more solid than my old man's memory. Later that night, when they had gone home and Lena was in the shower, I took the phone from the shelf and brought it to the bedroom. I put in headphones and listened to the recording. Hearing their words again, calmly, without the immediate rush of hurt, allowed me to focus on details. I noticed the exact time on the wall clock when Galia's name came up, the way Lena's voice changed when she spoke about me in front of friends versus when she spoke about legal steps. I wrote all this down. As days turned into weeks, I continued this quiet work. I did not record everything. I did not want to live as a spy in my own home, only as a man who refused to be erased by other people's stories. I chose moments where plans were made, where my name, the apartment, or my pension appeared. Each time, I dated it, labeled it, and backed it up on an old memory card I kept in my toolbox. If someone had asked, they would have thought I was organizing screws. In truth, I was organizing their words. During this time, Lena's behavior toward me did not change. If anything, she grew more confident. She started calling me confused in front of people more often. At the market, when I tried to ask the seller about the price of apples, she laughed and told him I mixed up numbers these days. At the clinic, she said to a nurse that I could not handle forms alone. I watched the nurse look at me with the same mixture of pity and dismissal I had seen before. I understood now that every small remark in public added another layer to the picture she was painting, a picture of a man who needed a guardian. One afternoon, near the start of spring, I had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Kaval. He checked the device, made some adjustments, and asked how I was coping. I thought carefully before answering. Then I told him that my hearing was improving, that my brain was adjusting, and that at home people still thought I could not hear. He frowned and asked if that caused problems. I said simply that I was hearing things they did not intend for me to hear, and that some of those things concerned my money and future. He became serious. He said that from a medical point of view, my mind was fine, that my memory and understanding were good for my age, that I could make my own decisions. He asked if I wanted this written somewhere. I nodded. He said he could put a note in my file and, if needed later, provide a medical statement that I was competent. I thanked him. I did not fully understand yet how important that document might become, but I knew it was another piece in the box of facts I was building. When I left the clinic that day, the air outside felt cold and sharp, even though the sun was shining. People walked past me, speaking into phones, arguing, laughing. Cars hissed on wet streets. Every sound reached me in layers. I realized I was standing in two worlds at once. The world everyone saw, where I was a quiet deaf man shuffling home, and the world inside my head, where I heard too much and said too little. On my way back, I stopped by Andrew's balcony again. I told him, in a low voice, that I had started writing and recording. He nodded slowly and said that, in the end, people believe what they can see and hear, not what they are simply told. He advised me to be patient, to let my file grow thicker before I made any big moves. Patience was something I already had. 10 years of silence had trained me well. That night, after Lena went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The apartment was dark, except for the small light from the modem. I took my old phone, opened the camera app, and set it on top of the cupboard, lens pointed toward the table where most serious talks happened. Then I walked back to the bedroom and marked a date in my notebook with a red pen instead of my usual blue. I did not know exactly what would happen on that date yet, only that it would belong to me, not to the story Lena and Irina were trying to write. The red mark in my notebook sat on the page like a small wound. Every time I opened it, my eyes went there first. It reminded me that time was not endless, that if I waited too long, other people's plans might harden into something I could not break. I did not yet know what form my own action would take, but I knew that soon my silence would have to end. Until then, I kept doing the one thing I could do well: observe, record, and prepare. A few days after I set the phone on top of the cupboard, Lena invited her sister Irina and her friend Galia over. I knew about the visit in advance because she walked around the apartment cleaning more than usual and complaining about dust. She told me with large gestures that the women were coming to cheer her up and that they might talk loudly, so I should not worry if I saw a lot of movement. She made it sound like a harmless small party. To her, it probably was. To me, it was another test. When they arrived, I greeted them in my usual quiet way, reading their lips as they said polite words about my health. Then I moved to the bedroom with a book, acting as if I wanted to rest. In reality, I watched them through a gap in the door until they settled at the table. Once they started pouring tea and arranging cakes, I returned to the living room, walked casually under the cupboard, and tapped the screen of my old phone twice, starting the recording. The small camera eye stared down at them while they began their real conversation. From the bedroom, the sounds came through the wall like a muffled radio, but the device caught everything more clearly. Later, when I listened back, I heard the shape of their talk. At first, it was general gossip: who had gained weight, whose son had lost his job, which neighbor had started drinking too much. Then the subject, as always, slid toward my condition and Lena's situation. Galia asked if I was worse, if I was starting to forget things. Lena answered that I was slower and more confused, that I did not notice when she moved money or changed small things in the house. Irina added that this was good for Lena because she could plan ahead without resistance. They spoke about the apartment as if it were already in Lena's name. Irina suggested again that Lena should talk to a lawyer friend of a friend about arranging something like partial guardianship or power of attorney. She said that if official papers described me as unable to manage complex decisions, nobody would question some later changes. Galia laughed and said that the important part was to act before I made any new will, or in her words, did something old and romantic like giving the flat to my daughter directly. Hearing my life and home discussed like a puzzle to solve gave me a strange calm. The more they treated me like a problem on paper, the more I understood that my answer also had to be on paper. Later that night, after they left, I replayed the recording with headphones on. I wrote down key sentences word for word. I marked the timestamps. I noted that they were relaxed, laughing, drinking tea, not speaking under stress. That would matter later, I knew. People often claim they said cruel things only when angry. This was not anger. This was planning. I saved the file, copied it to my memory card, and placed the card in my toolbox between a small set of screwdrivers and a rusty pair of pliers. The next step I knew I had to take led me to the bank. I had put this off for a long time. Banks made me nervous. There were many forms, many numbers, and staff spoke quickly. But now, with my hearing partly back and my eyes still sharp, I felt ready. I chose a day when Lena had planned to meet Mira and would be busy. I told her I was going for a walk to move my joints. She patted my arm and told me to be careful crossing the street. If she had known where I was really going, she might have followed. Inside the bank branch, the air was cool and smelled of printer ink and coffee. People sat on chairs, scrolling their phones, waiting for their number. When mine flashed on the screen, I went to a small desk where a man with gray hair and glasses greeted me. His name tag said Litvin. I told him, in slow, clear speech, that I had hearing problems, but that I could understand if he spoke facing me. He nodded, adjusted his posture, and did exactly that. I noted this detail. Some people still knew how to respect another person's pace. I said I wanted to review my accounts and check who was listed where. I told him I had heard family members talk about future changes and that I wanted to understand my position. I did not accuse anyone. I spoke as if I were simply an old man who wanted peace of mind. He typed, looked at the screen, and then explained that the main apartment was in my name, that there was no shared ownership on the deed yet, and that my primary pension account and savings account were also in my name only. Then I asked a different kind of question. What would be needed if, one day, someone came and said that I was no longer capable of managing my affairs? How would the bank decide? He became more serious. He said that in such cases they would require legal documents, a court decision, medical statements, formal powers of attorney. He said that just being a spouse or child was not enough. I listened carefully and asked if there was a way to note in my file that I wished to be present in person for any big changes, and that I wanted the bank to be careful with any such claims in future. He said this was possible. We spent some time setting up simple protections. He suggested stronger passwords and some alerts for large withdrawals or changes. He printed a brief note saying that I, as the account holder, had visited in person, that I understood my situation, and that I requested additional caution for future changes. He signed it, stamped it, and gave me a copy. I put that paper into the same envelope where I kept my medical notes. It was not a full shield, but it was a piece of armor. When I left the bank, my head was buzzing, but not in a bad way. For the first time since I had started hearing my family's plans, I felt that I had taken a step that did not depend on them. They did not know about this visit. They did not control this conversation. Here, in this space of numbers and rules, I had spoken for myself, not through Lena's mouth. Back at home, I went to Andrew's balcony again. The sky was heavy with clouds. He handed me a cup of tea, saw my face, and asked without words how it had gone. I told him that the bank confirmed the apartment and accounts were in my name, that any change would need real documents, not just gossip. He nodded and said that this was good news, but also a warning. It meant that if Lena and her sister were serious, they would try to collect those documents. Doctor's notes, social worker reports, stories about my confusion. He said that if they were already talking about it so easily, I should be ready. I told him about the recording, about the words they used, about my notebook. He listened, then said something I did not forget. He said that sound is easy to deny, but recordings are hard. Memory is easy to insult, but paper is stubborn. He suggested that I should find a professional who could help me turn my notebook and files into a true shield. A lawyer, someone who understood how stories looked in court or at official desks. I knew he was right, but the thought of entering yet another office full of forms made my stomach tighten. Still, I wrote lawyer in my notebook that night, underlined twice. Meanwhile, life at home went on. Lena did not notice my small trips to the bank or my longer talks with Andrew. She was busy with her own plans. She spent more time on the phone, often walking from room to room, thinking I heard nothing but the soft thud of her steps. I heard her tell Irina that she was tired of waiting and wanted a clearer timeline. Irina replied that they could not rush, that they needed to prepare the ground, convince others that my mind was slipping, not just my ears. Sometimes, when I sat on the couch with the television on silent, I watched their reflections in the screen behind the subtitles. I could see Lena's face twist in annoyance when I asked a small question. I could see Mira's shoulders tighten whenever she had to repeat something. It was like watching a play where you already knew the ending, but not yet your own final line. One evening, while I was pretending to scroll through photos on my phone, a new message flashed on the big screen in the living room. The television was connected to Lena's family chat. When someone sent a message, a preview appeared in the corner. This time, it was from Irina. She announced that she had booked a community hall and small restaurant area for a joint celebration, Lena's birthday and their wedding anniversary together. She wrote that it would be a chance to honor Lena's strength and patience living with a deaf husband and to talk about the future with the whole family. Lena read the message out loud for herself, even though she believed I could not hear. I watched her mouth form words about speeches, photos, and how wonderful it would be to show everyone they were united. Mira answered in the chat with an excited line about making a slideshow. Other relatives reacted with happy icons that I did not fully understand but recognized from context. The TV screen glowed with their enthusiasm. Sitting there on the couch, I felt that thin, cold line of clarity inside me sharpen. A public event, a hall full of relatives, speeches about my deafness and their strength, plans to talk openly about the future. They thought this would be their stage, their moment to fix the story of who I was in everyone's minds. They were giving themselves a perfect theater. What they did not realize yet was that I had been listening to rehearsals for weeks. And now, for the first time in 10 years, I would be able to answer in my own voice, at a time and place of my choosing. The message about the party did not leave my mind. That night, I sat at the small bedroom desk with my notebook open and drew another red line under the date Irina had written in the chat. I stared at the numbers for a long time. That day would either be the moment they fixed their story about me in front of everyone or the moment I finally spoke my own. I knew which one I preferred, but I also knew I could not simply walk into a hall, shout about recordings, and hope life would sort itself. If there was one thing the last 10 years had taught me, it was that good intentions without structure fail. I needed structure. The next day, I knocked on Andrew's door instead of waiting for him on the balcony. He opened it in his old house clothes, surprised to see me standing there instead of just waving from outside. I told him I needed a name, someone who understood papers and rights. His eyebrows lifted when I said the word lawyer, but he did not ask why. Instead, he thought for a moment and mentioned a woman named Petrenko, who had helped his cousin during a messy inheritance dispute. He said she was quiet and did not waste words, and that she listened carefully before giving any advice. That was exactly the kind of person I needed. He wrote her number for me on a small piece of paper. The digits looked like a code to a different world. Later, when I was back in my bedroom, I stared at the phone for a long time before making the call. Old fear from years of avoiding complex conversations rose in my chest. I reminded myself that my ears worked now, that my mind was clear, and that the worst thing that could happen was confusion, not death. I dialed. A calm female voice answered. I told her I had hearing issues but could follow if she spoke slowly and clearly. She did. I said I had questions about property and family and that I had been deaf for a long time and now heard things my family did not know I could hear. She asked me to come to her office in a few days. When she asked if I could come alone, something in her tone told me she was already used to people arriving with controlling relatives. I said yes, alone. Her office was on the second floor of an older building that smelled of dust and coffee. The sign on the door was simple. Inside, the room was tidy and not fancy. A desk, some chairs, shelves with files. No heavy art, no fake luxury. She greeted me, shook my hand, and looked directly at my face, not at my hearing device. That small respect eased my shoulders. She asked me to start from the beginning, but to focus on facts, not feelings. That, for once, was easy for me. I told her about the accident, the deaf ears, the surgery, the slow return of sound. Then I told her about Lena, Irina, and the others. I described how they spoke when they believed I could not hear, how they referred to me as confused, how they planned to secure the apartment and money, how they spoke about doctors and documents. I did not cry. I spoke like I used to speak to mechanics at the factory, clearly, slowly, naming each part in order. Finally, I took the old phone from my bag, plugged in a small speaker, and played a short piece of one recording. Only the core lines, not the whole evening. It was enough. She listened with her eyes slightly narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. When the voices of my wife and her sister faded from the small speaker, the room felt very quiet. Ms. Petrenko asked whether I had more recordings. I said yes. She asked whether I had written notes of dates and situations. I said yes and showed her my notebook with blue and red lines. She flipped through it, reading entries here and there. Then she asked one more question. How was my mind, according to my doctor? I told her about Dr. Koval, about the tests, about his comment that my memory and reasoning were good for my age. She nodded and wrote something down. She explained that from what she had heard and read, it seemed my family was slowly building a case to present me as incapable so they could control my assets and decisions. She said this was sadly not rare. Some people saw disability or age as an opportunity. She told me that the good news was that I had time and proof. I was not yet standing in front of a judge hearing that others would speak for me. We could move first. Her plan was simple in outline, even if the details were complex. First, she wanted a fresh, clear medical paper confirming that my mind was sound and that my hearing, with the device, allowed me to communicate. She said this would make it harder for anyone to claim the opposite. Second, she wanted to secure the apartment and my main savings in a way that made changing ownership without my consent practically impossible. She did not list every tool she would use. She just said there were arrangements, forms, and registrations that could protect a person in my position. Third, she wanted me to think seriously about whether I wanted to stay in this marriage and under this roof or whether I needed distance. She said she would not push me either way, but that the law moved smoother when a person was clear. I sat there for a long time, holding the edge of her chair. Leaving Lena had not been my plan. For years, I had pictured us as two old people on a bench. But the bench I saw now in my mind was crowded. Lena, her sister, her friend, Mira, and Oleg, all sitting between me and any choice I made, holding my papers, speaking for me. That image made breathing difficult. I told the lawyer I was not ready to decide everything in one day, but I was ready to protect myself. She said that was enough for now. Before I left, she wrote a few short notes on a card. One for Dr. Kaval, asking for a clear capacity assessment, and one with a list of things I should ask my bank to confirm. She told me to bring any new paper to her before signing anything in front of anyone else. She also mentioned, almost as an aside, that there would be no harm in her being near, not inside, any big family event where people might try to pressure me. I thought of the party and felt a strange mix of dread and relief. My next visit was back to the ENT clinic. When I told the receptionist I needed to see the doctor regarding a statement, she scheduled me for the next available slot. During the appointment, I told him, more openly this time, that my hearing was good enough to understand speech and that my mind was clear, but that at home some people were hinting that I was confused. He frowned in a way that told me this was not new to him either. He asked me some memory and orientation questions, tests we had done before. I answered steadily. He nodded and said he would add a detailed note to my medical file and could provide a copy confirming my capacity as a patient if needed. I thanked him. I did not hold the paper in my hand that day. It went into his system, into the quiet world of files and codes. Knowing it was there was enough. Another piece of silent armor. Back at the bank, I returned to Mr. Litvin with the list from the lawyer in my pocket. We reviewed my accounts again. This time, I asked to change how some savings were held, moving part into a form that made it harder to touch without multiple steps. I asked him to add notes that I must be present for any loan or mortgage decisions regarding the apartment, that no new joint accounts be opened without my physical signature. He explained each step, checking that I understood. I repeated his explanations back to him in my own words. At the end, he printed another short confirmation of our conversation and my requests. I did not tell him about Lena and Irina. He did not ask. In his world, I was simply a cautious older man who did not want surprises. While I was doing this, life at home continued on its surface track. Lena busied herself with preparations for the joint celebration. She met with Irina to plan the menu and decorations. She and Mira exchanged messages about a slideshow of old photos. Young Lena in a wedding dress, young me holding baby Mira, birthdays, holidays. When they spoke in front of me, their mouths formed soft, nostalgic shapes. When they spoke in the kitchen or on the phone, their tone turned sharper. I heard Lena practicing lines about how hard it had been to live with a deaf husband, how much weight she had carried, how proud she was to have kept the family together. Sometimes I stood in the hallway and watched her through the gap in the door as she rehearsed in front of the living room mirror, wineglass in hand. She gestured toward an invisible audience, imitating pitying looks on their faces. She said that in the coming years she might need to make difficult choices for my own good. I knew exactly which choices she meant. Each time I heard that phrase, I wrote it down in the notebook, adding it to the pattern. At night, when the apartment finally quieted, I worked on something else, organizing my own voice. On my old phone and my newer one, I created a single audio file made of short pieces from several recordings. I did not want to play hours of gossip. No, I wanted a clear, simple chain, Lena and Irina calling me a burden, speaking about selling the apartment, discussing ways to convince doctors and others that I was confused, planning to send me to some quiet place when they were ready. I cut and arranged the clips until I had a short sequence that told that story in their own voices. To test it, I went to Andrew's apartment one afternoon when Lena was out. He had an old television with a simple speaker. We connected my phone. When he pressed play, the room filled with the sound of Lena's laughter, Irina's cool advice, Galia's sharp comments. Indri's face shifted from curiosity to anger to sadness. When it ended, he took a deep breath and said that anyone with ears and a heart would understand what was happening if they heard that. I felt something loosen in my chest. This was no longer just in my head. It was outside of me, real, playable. I also took time to think about what I would say myself. I did not want to scream at the party. I did not want to insult anyone. Yelling would only make me look unstable, which would help their story. Instead, I sat at my desk and wrote a few simple sentences in my notebook. I rewrote them several times until they felt like me. Plain, steady, without decoration. I planned to say my name, to say that I had been deaf and now could hear, to say how long I had been hearing without telling them, to say that I had heard their words and plans. And then, most important, to say that I had already taken steps to protect myself, and that from that night on I would no longer live in their version of my life. I did not share these lines with anyone. They stayed between the pages of the notebook next to the red date. As the party day approached, the apartment filled with small signs: new shirt for Lena, cleaned shoes, a fresh haircut for me that Lena insisted on. She said she wanted me to look presentable in photos. When the hairdresser commented, half joking, that at least I did not talk too much during appointments, Lena smiled and said I had become very easy to manage. I looked at myself in the mirror, at the almost invisible hearing device hidden by trimmed hair, and thought that easy to manage was no longer the truth. The night before the party, Lena laid out our clothes on chairs and checked the time on her phone again and again. She spoke to Mira about the slideshow and told Irina over the phone that tomorrow would be the beginning of the next phase. I lay on the bed, eyes closed, listening to every word. When the apartment finally fell silent, I got up, went to the desk, and slipped my phone, a small portable cable, and my notebook into a worn shoulder bag. I touched the cover of the notebook, where the red line under the date had almost bled through the paper from repeated tracing. In the morning, I put on my best shirt and the dark jacket I had not worn in years. Lena looked at me with approval and said, slowly and clearly, that I looked dignified. I nodded. I did not sign anything. I only picked up my bag. As we left the apartment, I felt the weight of the phone and the notebook against my side. On the way to the community hall, I heard the soft clink of glasses being arranged inside as staff prepared the tables, the faint echo of someone testing a microphone with a few meaningless syllables. Those small sounds, once impossible for me to hear, now seemed like signals. The stage they had chosen was ready. So was I. The community hall smelled like boiled potatoes, cheap perfume, and floor cleaner. Long tables stood in rows, already dressed with white cloths that did not quite reach the floor. Balloons that said "Happy Birthday" and "Anniversary" floated in corners, the strings tangled together. A small stage took up one side of the room, with a microphone stand and a portable speaker next to a screen where Mira's slideshow would play. It looked like a school event more than a grand celebration, but Lena's eyes shone as if it were a palace. Relatives began to arrive in clusters. They kissed Lena on both cheeks, patted my shoulder, and shouted kind, simple phrases at me. Good to see you. You look well. Still strong, eh? I smiled and nodded. My hearing device hummed softly under my hair, catching every word they assumed I could not hear. Mira and Oleg came in with a laptop and a box of old photos. She showed Lena a preview of the slideshow. I watched from the edge of the room as my own life flashed across the screen for a few seconds. Me in a wedding suit, me holding baby Mira, me standing in front of the factory. It was strange to see myself as an image in their story while the real me stood a few meters away, carrying a different script in my bag. Irina arrived last, dressed as if she were hosting an important conference. She gave a little speech right at the door about how proud she was of Lena, how not everyone could live with a deaf husband for so long and still look so good. I saw some relatives exchange looks, but most just nodded, not wanting to make trouble. They only knew the story they had been given. They did not know there was another one waiting. When everyone had found a seat and the food had started, the hall filled with the dull clatter of cutlery and small talk. I sat near the front, close to the stage, with my bag under my chair. Lena kept placing food on my plate, telling me in big gestures to eat. I took small bites. My hands were steady. My heart was not racing. If anything, I felt a strange calm, like the feeling I had before fixing a difficult machine. You check the tools, you follow the plan, and you trust your preparation more than your fear. After some time, Irina stood up and tapped a glass with her fork. The clear ringing cut through the room, and conversations died down. She announced that they would now honor Lena for her birthday and for all her years of strength. She spoke loudly, facing the crowd, not once turning to me. She described Lena as a heroine, a woman who had carried a heavy cross for 10 years, managing a husband who could not hear, could not follow, and often could not understand. She said that many women would have left by now, but Lena had stayed out of duty and love. While Irina talked, some people looked at me with sympathy. I could see their thoughts in their eyes. Poor man, poor woman, what a sad situation. They did not know that in my notebook, Irina's name appeared again and again next to words like burden, furniture, confuse him, and guardianship. I listened to her describe my life as if I were already halfway gone, and felt none of the numbness I used to feel. Only clarity. Then Lena took the microphone. She looked around the room, her eyes wet, and began to speak slowly, as if for my benefit. She said that life had not been easy, that losing my hearing had been a tragedy, that she had tried her best. She talked about nights spent translating the world for me, about decisions she had to make alone, about the fear of what would happen when his mind eventually followed his ears. She did not say she had already been telling people that my mind was failing. She did not mention plans to move me out and move my things around like furniture, but I heard those missing sentences under every word she chose. She said that, going forward, she might have to make difficult choices to keep us all safe, that sometimes love meant taking control when someone could not manage. She squeezed the microphone with both hands and looked down at me with a mixture of pity and pride. The picture was perfect from the outside. Strong wife, weak husband, supportive family. The story was almost complete. Almost. When she finished, people clapped. Some raised their glasses. Mira signaled to Oleg to prepare the slideshow. At that moment, I reached down, took my bag, and stood up. The chair made a small scraping sound on the floor. It was not loud, but it was enough to make a few heads turn. I walked slowly to the front of the room and held out my hand toward Lena, asking for the microphone. She looked confused, then a little amused, as if I were doing something cute and harmless. She handed it to me. I let the room quiet again. For a moment, all I heard was the faint buzz of the speakers and the distant clinking of dishes from the kitchen. Then I spoke. Not in broken gestures, not in the slow, flat voice I used when I tried to guess what people said. I spoke clearly, at normal speed, facing the room. I said, "My name is Ivan, and I can hear you." The silence that followed was heavy. Faces froze. Someone's fork dropped onto a plate with a sharp ring. Lena stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Irina's eyes went wide, then narrow. Mira looked almost afraid. I repeated calmly that I had had surgery months ago, that my hearing was back enough to follow speech, and that I had chosen not to tell anyone, because I wanted to understand what my own family really thought of me when they believed I was deaf. I did not shout. I did not insult. I just described. I told them about the night I lay in bed and heard Lena tell Irina that I was useful but basically gone, like a piece of furniture that still brought in money. I told them about the cafe where Lena and Galia joked about me being a broken radio. I told them about dinners where Mira and Oleg spoke about needing to sort out my situation before starting their own family. I watched their faces as I spoke, seeing shock, denial, and shame move like waves across the tables. Then I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and held it up. I said that sometimes words were hard to remember, but my old habit from the factory taught me to keep records. I told them I had written down their sentences with dates, and that some of those sentences they could now hear themselves. I walked to the small sound system where Oleg had planned to connect the laptop and plugged in my phone instead. He looked too stunned to stop me. With one tap, the hall filled with the clear, unmistakable voices of Lena and Irina from my living room. Everyone listened as Lena, laughing, called me a quiet wallet, as Irina calmly advised her to get control of the apartment and money, as they discussed convincing doctors I was confused, as they mentioned sending me to a quiet place, and selling our home. The words sounded worse in that hall than they had in my headphones. Here, they had an audience that was not just me. When the recording ended, I paused it and looked at the crowd. Nobody clapped now. Some relatives stared at their plates. Others looked from me to Lena and back again, trying to match the woman they thought they knew with the voice they had just heard. I spoke again, still calm. I said that I did not call them here to punish anyone with police or newspapers. I said I had come to make one thing clear. My life was mine. I told them I had gone to my doctor and that he had written that my mind was sound. I told them I had gone to the bank and asked that no changes to my accounts or apartment be made without me, in person, fully aware. I said I had spoken to a lawyer and that papers were being prepared to protect my home and my future choices. Then I turned to Lena. I said that what hurt most was not the jokes, but the plans, the way she spoke about me as if I were already gone, as if she were just waiting for the right excuse to move me out and move her life on. I said I would not stand in her way. She was free to build whatever life she wanted, but she would do it without using my silence as a ladder. I told the room that after this day I would not be living with Lena. I did not describe every legal step I would take. I only said that I would not sign any document she or Irina put in front of me without my own lawyer present, and that if anyone heard stories about me being confused or dangerous, they should remember what they had just listened to. Not my version, theirs. I handed the microphone back to Lena. She did not take it at first. Her hands shook. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Irina started to say something about misunderstandings and private jokes, but her voice faltered under the weight of their recorded laughter. Mira looked like someone had pulled the floor from under her feet. I did not wait for their explanations. I picked up my bag, nodded once to the room, and walked toward the exit. As I pushed open the heavy door, the hall behind me filled with low, confused murmurs, the sound of chairs scraping, glasses left half full on the tables. For 10 years, everyone had believed I lived in silence. Now, leaving that noisy hall, I realized the truth was different. I had simply been listening for the right moment to speak,